Hey everybody, this is Pierre Quinn, and you're listening to episode number 98 of the Leading While Green podcast, where my mission is to help you live, learn, and lead with confidence. On this episode of the podcast, I'm joined by Omar Harris, author of the new book, Leaderboard, The DNA of High-Performance Teams. And in this conversation, we talk about Omar's professional journey, about how not giving up earlier in his career has made all the difference, and about how being an author has impacted his leadership influence. This is a great conversation, tons of insights for both emerging and seasoned leaders. So get ready to take some notes and listen up. Excited for episode number 98 of the Leading While Green podcast. We are only a couple of episodes away from episode 100. And I remember when I started this podcast journey, and now to think that we're almost at episode 100. I want to thank each and every one of you that has supported this podcast, this leadership journey. We've had some incredible guests on the show who have given us tons and tons and tons of insight and major keys. And hopefully you've been able to put that into practice to grow as a leader. And hopefully you've hopped over to Apple Podcasts or wherever you've listened to podcasts and left a 5-star review and some comments, because the Leading While Green podcast has been making a difference in your life. And I want to encourage you to keep doing it, keep sharing it on social, let other people know about this leadership journey. I want to remind you that my new book, Leading While Scared, How to Find the Courage to Keep Going, is out. And you can check that out at prcquinn.com/scared. Now, got some great things coming up on the horizon, so you want to stay tuned. You want to stay tuned because it's some awesome things in the works, and I can't wait to share it with you. And I'm going to let all of my podcast listeners know what's coming down the pike as it relates to the Leading While Scared project. Okay, my guest today is Omar Harris, who is from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and he's passionate about leading teams, high-performance coaching, and inspiring more people to adopt the servant leader mindset. Omar is a Gallup certified strengths coach, a best-selling award-winning author, an independent publishing guru, an entrepreneur, and a 20-year veteran of the global pharmaceutical industry. He is the author of the book Leaderboard, The DNA of High-Performance Teams, and currently he resides in Sao Paulo, Brazil, and is the general manager of Allergen PLC. And he's currently working on the sequel to Leaderboard. But in a conversation today, we talk about Leaderboard and how what Omar shares in his book can make a difference for leaders everywhere. Here's my conversation with Omar Harris. Omar, thanks for being my guest today.
Pierre, it's a great pleasure to be with you today.
So, Omar, take us back. Talk to the listeners about college, about your collegiate years, and what were some of your professional pursuits or thoughts about what your professional career would look like while you were in college?
It's a great question, Pierre. I never would have imagined when I was in college doing what I'm doing now. I think that for me, I was still trying to figure out, as most people are, trying to figure out their path forward. But I had an opportunity while I was in college to do an internship with Pfizer Pharmaceuticals. I went to University of Florida, A&M University in Tallahassee, Florida. And while I was in school, part of my university's MBA program was the opportunity to go on 3 internships before we graduated. So my first internship was with Pfizer as a pharmaceutical sales rep in Detroit, Michigan, back in 1998. And when I did that internship, I really became passionate about healthcare. I became passionate about the impact that the sales representatives have in terms of prescribing practices for professionals like doctors, and really the making an impact in my life and my career. And so once I had that experience, for me, it really became pharma was going to be where I was going to spend the majority of my time, and that's where I spent the rest of my career. So I really caught the bug after that internship, spending 8 months in Detroit, Michigan. And then a year and a half later, I had the opportunity to go to Brazil for the first time as a international marketing intern. And I spent 16 months in Brazil in that second internship, international marketing, learned the language, adapted to the culture. And that's when the global bug got put into me. So I knew two things as a junior going into senior in college is that I wanted to be in pharma and I wanted to have a career that would span the globe. And so that was really the formative experiences I gained while in university.
Let's talk about learning the language and adapting to the culture and how that relates. Many of us who listen to the podcast aren't making an international leap in our career. That's something that you did. But what about the principles of learning the language and adopting and adapting to the culture can we apply to our professional journey, regardless of where we are in the world?
So I think that, whenever you move into any new environment, you have two choices. You can either maintain who you are and stick to your principles and who you think you are, or you can make the adaptation to the environment that you're in. Culturally, when you live overseas, it's very important that you make the adaptation because making that adaptation, making the choice to try to assimilate to the culture will give you the best opportunity to succeed within that culture. And I think that's a principle that applies to going into new companies, going into new roles, going into new challenges, is trying to assimilate to the challenge or assimilate to the environment that you're in. That will give you the best opportunity for you to succeed. In my case, when I moved down to Brazil, it's a bit of a funny story because when I first arrived, they told me that I didn't need to learn Portuguese before I arrived at the office. They said I'd be working with numbers and didn't need to know the language. So I showed up in my first day and my boss was like, do you speak Portuguese? And I said, no. And he said, well, come back to me in 2 months. When you do, I can't use you. So
Wow.
I'm on a 60-month internship. Basically telling me 2 months are gone because I can't speak the language. So I went home that day. I really was very depressed. I called my mom. I wanted to come home. I wanted to give up. But something in me said I have to make the most of this situation. So on my way back to work the next day, I picked up a Portuguese to English dictionary and I started defining 25 words a day and memorizing 25 words a day. And basically in 2 months, I taught myself the language. And then I got lessons for a month and then I was fluent in the language and basically was writing and communicating and had assimilated to the culture. So I think that mindset of confronting challenges, not letting anything make you give up, and finding a path forward has been a defining characteristic of my career, and something that I would recommend to your listeners is that you have a choice when you're faced with a challenge to be solution oriented or be problem oriented, and solution oriented people always have more success.
So was it something that your mom said? Was it the recognition that you had put in all this hard work and this incredible opportunity was that you were in danger of missing out on it? What was it that when you felt depressed and sad and disappointed, even from the perspective of you didn't think you had to learn the language, what was it that made you say, you know what, I'm going to do this and face it head on for 2 months so that you could become fluent in the language?
I think I just have an inherent well of optimism, Pierre. I think for me, I'm going to make the best of every situation, and it's something that's been in me since my entire life. My mother definitely reinforced that. I didn't come to Brazil for no reason. There was a purpose for me being here, and I had to make the most of it. And she really reminded me that it's upon me. I have to look at the situation correctly and have the right attitude about the situation. How I perceive the situation would definitely shape how the situation would go. So my perception of it as a positive opportunity to really challenge myself and grow allowed me to be successful in that particular opportunity.
So as you're doing these internship rotations in your MBA program, you do some time in Detroit. I'm from Michigan, close to Detroit, and then you end up in Brazil for some time. What are some things about the world of work that you did not learn in undergrad, you did not learn in grad school, you only really became introduced to them as you're working? Like it wasn't in a textbook, a professor didn't, you had no idea this was coming, but you had to maybe pivot and learn quickly to adapt to the world of real-time work.
I think real-time work has real-time consequences. So I think when you're in college, you're in a bit of an aquarium, right, where nothing you do really has an actual implication. But you're being tasked with launching a product, especially when you're talking about pharmaceuticals, where the degree of the effort you put in is important, because at the end of that effort is a patient. And so for me, that was really what kind of shaped my mindset around the work that I was doing. Depending on the work you're doing, that really shapes your mindset in terms of what you bring to the table every day, and really bringing your best self. The other thing I learned is that no one can make you engaged. I mean, you're going to deal with a lot of different bosses, and in this particular internship in Brazil, my first boss, the one who basically told me that he couldn't use me for 2 months, he ended up being fired 6 months later, and I had to adapt to a new boss coming in. And no one can train you for different leadership styles, right? So you have different teachers in university and different teachers in school, but when you have a different, your job is only as good as your boss is, right? And that's one thing I learned as well, that no one can prepare you for in university is the fact that the influence of your boss on your life and your work-life balance is tremendous and phenomenal. So, I think by seeing the transition of one leadership style to a different leadership style, much more supportive leadership style, someone who was much more willing to mentor me and much more willing to challenge me in a more productive and positive way, I understood the impact that every leader has on their people. So now, as an enterprise leader, many years later, I really focus on my managers, because to my employees, the manager is the company. I'm not the company. The CEO is not the company. Their manager is the company. So if I can really improve the skill set of the managers and the people orientation of the managers, then I'm improving the environment for every employee in my company. But I learned that, way back when I was exposed to different leadership styles in Brazil.
That's powerful, because a lot of times when we look at how higher education is framed, there is this school of thought that you just go to school, you just get the grades, and there are a lot of times where we miss out having conversations about relationships, about adaptability, about how everything isn't going to be the way it is that's framed in the textbook or when you do that project in school. So what advice would you have for maybe those in an MBA program? Maybe they're a stellar student in the MBA program and they're ready to tackle a big project in real time, but they haven't done a good job of maybe forming relationships or assessing themselves before they get into the workplace.
I think, the sooner you get, that's a great question, Pierre, the sooner you arrive at self-awareness, the better served you're going to be. So the sooner you can look at yourself in the mirror and understand your strengths, understand your blind spots, the better off you're going to be, which is why it's important to have a network. And it's important to have, what I would tell MBA students is really make sure you're building a network and making sure you are finding mentors, people who you would gravitate towards, who will tell you the truth about yourself, not only what you're good at, because stellar students get used to hearing all the positive things about themselves, but the positive things about yourself are not going to help you in the work environment, in the competitive work environment. Really having a holistic view of who you are, your strengths, your weaknesses, and where you have to develop yourself, and maybe even your derailers, because we all have derailers as well. The earlier you understand those things about yourself and the earlier you begin attacking those things, the more successful you're going to be in your career. And if you can understand those things before you begin working, you're going to have a phenomenal success and have a leg up on everybody else, because most people don't graduate with that level of understanding.
What has becoming an author taught you about yourself? That journey, and I know you're working on another book now, the sequel to Leaderboard. What has this experience taught you about yourself, and how have you grown as a result?
I think ultimate resilience, but I think it also has taught me about balance. So I'll talk about each of those points in turn. So I started writing I wrote a novel before I wrote Leaderboard, and my first novel, I started writing it when I was 23 years old. And it took me 12 years to complete and publish that book. And so what I mean resilience is never giving up on your dream. So if you have a dream, if there's something driving you, if you have a calling or something that you feel you must do, you can never give up. So I think for me, even though there were times where during my professional career, which was blossoming, I put the book away for 6 months or 8 months, I never gave up on the dream of being a published author. And I made sure I put the time in to make it happen. Even though it took me a long time to get there, I rewrote the book 4 times from front to back. Eventually, the book came out, and it was a smashing success. Best-selling book, award-winning book, and has done very, very well for a first-time author in the fiction space. So that's the first, I think, lesson is around resilience. The second one is around really understanding what's important to you and balance. So for me, writing is an outlet, and I think that once again it comes back down to understanding who you are yourself and what really keeps you engaged and keeps you in a positive headspace. For me, writing is something that is a hobby, but is also a passion that helps keep me engaged and helps keep me centered. And you know, it's very important that you understand those things about yourself early on, because they can really help you avoid burnout, can really help you avoid all of the negative aspects of having a corporate career that's flourishing, which is you're going to work a lot. You may become a workaholic. You may avoid personal relationships. You actually lose balance. So for me, writing was a way to connect back to my core and connect back to my sense of balance. And it taught me early I had to create time and boundaries around things that are important to me. And I think that professionals today need to understand you need to make time for what energizes you. And it can't just be, you can't allocate everything to your job because you're going to burn out eventually. And that's not going to be good for you or anybody else, especially if you're in a leadership capacity. You need to understand the things that energize you. And likely there'll be things like exercise, it could be reading, could be, traveling, but making time for those things is really, really important to your productivity and to your engagement and to your success.
Well, how has writing the leaderboard from your purview impacted your influence as a leader in social spaces when you're presenting or having an exchange with someone and you mention, I wrote a book on this topic, or I've researched this topic. What impact has it had on you from that perspective?
I think it's interesting, especially because one of the main things that's interesting about myself in terms of leaderboard is that I'm still working, right? I'm not on the ivory tower of thought leaders. I'm not, in academia. I'm not writing to you from a perspective that's so far away from the day-to-day of business that people can't relate to me. So one of the reasons why I wanted to publish Leaderboard while I'm still working in an enterprise is because I wanted to show that I actually do this. It's not, one of the things I was just having this conversation yesterday during my mid-year performance review with some of my employees was around the fact that my employees read the book. They've read, I have customers who read Leaderboard. I have employees who read the book. And if I wasn't 100% consistent with the principles that I'm rolling out in this book, everybody would know it right away because I'm working right now. Right? I can't hide my behaviors, right? And this individual told me, she was like, Omar, everybody, they read the book and they see it. It's 100% you. This is exactly who you are and how you lead. It's really documented. So I think it adds a level of credibility to my interactions socially. So to your original question, I think the fact that I'm still working and I'm actually implementing these practices on a daily basis adds tremendous credibility to what I'm saying, because I'm actually innovating on a constant basis. I'm in the lab every day, basically, at the ground level, innovating different ways to drive and create high performance teams. I'm not removed from it. I'm very much engaged with it. And I think it adds a lot of credibility to my message. And it has helped me really influence a lot of young leaders around the world. I have a lot of mentees all over the world. And I really, people are beginning to adapt these practices, and they're seeing that they definitely work, and that only furthers the influences that I'm having as a writer right now.
There's an increasingly greater number of leadership books, self-improvement books, written from a myth perspective, a fable perspective. Why did you choose that particular position to take on your book instead of the sort of more standardized ways that we look at leadership material?
A great question, Pierre. I think the primary motivation was this is a book about application. And for a book to be about application, I need to be able to show you how you can implement things. The book was written really for people who are going to be new into management, or who are having management challenges, or people who work with managers and are trying to improve overall performance of organizations, like consultants, HR professionals, people of that nature, team coaches, strengths coaches, things of that nature. So I didn't want to be talking theoretically, because one of my major frustrations with the leadership literature that I came up on was that it was very theoretical, And I had difficulty figuring out how I was going to implement these things in the ground. For example, a book like Good to Great, which is one of my favorite books by Jim Collins, which talks about the principles, the 6 principles at great companies who had 10 times, market performance over a period of 30 years. You look at the principle like first who, then what, which is the first principle in the book, which talks about before you decide where the bus is going to go, get the right people on the bus. But that book doesn't tell you who are the right people. How do you define who the right people will be, right? So I had to take the next step and define for myself, what is that who for me? That who ended up becoming whom in my book. So I had to define the practical application of that principle for myself. And now I'm defining it for everybody else because I've actually worked out it and put it into practice. And it definitely drives results by sourcing people who have work ethic, heart, optimism, and maturity. And in the book, you can read a chapter of a leader doing a whom-based interview, and you can feel the dynamic. So by being a narrative, you can see how those questions are asked. You can see how the responses go. You can understand how the manager is gauging whether the interviewee is responding well or not. And so I think it just brings it to life better than if I were to say, listen, you should be hiring for work ethic, heart, optimism, and maturity. And this is the questionnaire you can use.
When you get scared,
So I think that's the key.
So let's stay on that for a bit. A lot of times when we talk about developing high performance teams, a lot of emphasis is placed on working with the kinks out with the team and addressing problems once the team has been assembled. But you share this idea of how much the hiring process early on, before the person even joins the team, is a great way to actually build a high performance team. Can you take us through? And I know number 4 is that whom style of interviewing, but can you take us through the other 3 steps of this 4 steps to building a high performance team?
Yeah, definitely. So I think what I began thinking about, Pierre, was, it's sort of like, if you think about the difference between a Michelin star chef and a regular someone who's cooking at their house, what is the main difference between the meal you're going to eat at a Michelin star restaurant and a regular chef? It's the quality of the materials, the quality of the food, the quality of the raw materials that they're going to put into the dish, right? So that's where this principle came from, which was, how do I make sure that I'm sourcing the right quality right from the start? Before I even start cooking or deciding what we're going to be doing together, the kind of dish I'm going to make, how do I make sure I source the right raw material? So the first thing was, as I mentioned before, hiring for the right DNA right from the start, looking beyond education, pedigree, experience, and looking at more behavioral indicators of success. And, for me, people who work hard, who have shared passion, who are solution-oriented, and who are mature enough to deal with inevitable disagreement, if you get a team of people who have that, I can almost guarantee you're going to be successful right from the beginning. But once you get the people on board, you still have to make sure that you build a personal connection with them. And this is where the second principle I call interviewing comes in. And that's not interviewing, it's INNER viewing. Interviewing is a step that I utilize during the onboarding process, where I build a personal connection with each person coming on the team. And this is where I go deeper than interviewing. I get into their motivators, their drivers, their desires, things they hate, things that made them successful in the past. I try to get a holistic understand their strengths, their weaknesses, their derailers. I try to get a holistic understanding of them right from the beginning and give them the same of myself. So I reveal all the same information I'm asking them, I'm giving it back on my side. And it builds an immediate bond of trust because they understand that I'm asking these questions because I'm trying to help them be successful individually, right? And that process engenders us together. It builds immediate trust. And I have a personal connection with each person on my team. So that's the second most important step, I think, is having a personal connection, a personal relationship, and a personal high-level understanding of the person you're dealing with. Too many managers focus on the role and not the person. They're like, I need you to do this job. Well, everyone will do a job differently. So what is it going to make about this individual that will make them successful in that job? And that's the step I take additionally, which is to understand the individual who has to do that job. So I can put them in the right position to succeed. Then the final step is, so now I've got the right raw material. I have a personal relationship with each individual. I understand on a very holistic level each individual and the team as a whole. Now, how do I put the team to work? That third principle is the leaderboard. It's exercising shared accountability. It's gamifying performance. And so the big idea here is that in every group of people, there are going to be people who are naturally talented in getting things done. So natural executors. There are going to be people who are naturally advocates, people who are great at influencing positive outcomes. There are going to be people who are really, really good at fostering and building relationships. And then there are going to be people who are naturally good at strategic thinking. So solving problems, generating options, understanding the situation. So what I do is I organize my team into those four work areas, those four pillars. And then I let them lead the team. So that's the leaderboard concept. So the leaderboard is who are the actual leaders of the team in execution, influencing, relationship building, and strategic thinking. And I empower those leaders to drive to outcomes. And we gamify the process in terms of really who gets to the outcome fastest within their given pillar will get a reward, and those who come in last or who come in last have to have a little bit of an example of coming in last. So there's a bit of a gamifying and competition within the team that drives that competitive spirit, which drives us to hit our outcomes. So those are really the three really big ideas that are in leaderboard that will help every manager at every level hack their way to high performance.
You share things that fall really under the category of servant leadership. And I know when we look at leadership models over the years, starting off with that whole great man, great woman idea of leadership, it's really power-based. Do this because I say so, because I'm the leader. And some companies have found a modicum of success doing things that way. But now, because of the way that culture has shifted, the emphasis on emotional intelligence, about caring about not just the job, but the person that's doing the job, there is this underscoring of servant leadership. How has servant leadership impacted your maturation, and why do you continue to posit this idea of leadership?
I think, Pierre, because I've worked for great servant leaders. I came up under servant leaders. I came up under leaders who, rather than look at me and look at a position and say, you're a product manager, they said, you're Omar with these strengths in a product manager role, and I want to help you succeed. And I just saw the impact of my own success. I became, under servant leaders, I became the fastest marketing director ever in the history of my company. I became the youngest senior marketing director ever in the history of my company. I became one of the youngest general managers, of a large pharma company in a foreign market in many recent years. And it's all because of the nurturing that you get from a servant leader is very different than the command and control. It's very easy to command and control. It's very difficult to form a personal relationship with each person and to understand their unique drivers and to be constantly coaching people. It's exhausting. It's a lot of work, but the outcome is much more secured and assured when you apply that principle. So for me, because that was my example of leadership, that's, we become we emulate what we experience, right? And so I'm just emulating what I've experienced in my career that's made me successful. And now, especially now, because I believe we're in a whole, that we're in a whole different ball game when it comes to the type of people who are in the workforce now and what they will respond to. They're not responding to command and control leadership, which is why employee engagement rates are lower than ever in history. So servant leaders, rather than reinvent some new form of leadership, let's go with what works. I know that servant leadership works. And I know the success that I've had being a servant leader and working under servant leaders. And so really just propagating that idea is really responding to that employee engagement crisis and making sure that we're impacting people in a better way.
So I'm going to ask you to put on your sales and marketing hat one more time. And here's the scenario. The scenario is I am the director of training for a major pharmaceutical company, and I am trying to pick a book for my interns to read every year. And I come across Leaderboard and I come across a couple of other books. Why should I pick Leaderboard to give to my interns?
So the reason why you should pick Leaderboard to give to your interns is because it's going to embed in them right from the beginning the idea that they're going to have to grow up to become different types of leaders, and it's going to inspire them because they're going to see the type of success they can have by being a different type of leader, and they're going to be able to compare the leader in Leaderboard to their actual manager. And they're going to understand by reading the book the difference between the type of relationship that the fictional manager has with this team versus the type of relationship they're going to have with their current manager. They're going to be to utilize the principles to actually influence their manager, perhaps to be more of a servant leadership type. You can utilize the book from the point of view of an employee. You can utilize it from the point of view of a manager. So it will actually help them be more influential with their manager. But more importantly, it's going to, what we just talked about in the previous question, it's going to give them a something to aspire to. They can emulate the leader in the book, Coach Sam Lombardi, and with that aspiration, they'll be able to more quickly become more successful leaders, which I think is the point of hiring interns. And you want to build the leaders of tomorrow. And Leaderboard will more effectively and faster hack that process to build that.
So, Omar, how do we catch up with you if we want to get a copy of the book, if we want to find out more about what you're doing? What are the links, the URLs, so that we can stay connected to you?
Thanks, Pierre. The best way to get all the information about what I'm doing is on my website. So www.omarlharris.com, OMARLHARRIS.com. From my website, you can access autographed copies of the book. You can go to the Amazon link and purchase the book. You can, more importantly, read the articles that I write regularly on leadership principles, and also contact me if you need any support with anything in your career. So I think that from that one central location, we can create that relationship.
My guest on this episode has been Omar Harris, author of the new book, Leaderboard, The DNA of High Performance Teams. Omar, thanks for being my guest today.
Pierre, thank you so much.
I really enjoyed that conversation with Omar Harris, and I want to invite you to check out Omar and his book. Go to omarlharris.com. That's omarlharris.com to get your copy of Leaderboard and check out more of Omar's work. Incredible conversation. Hope you took some great notes, and I hope you're preparing to pass this conversation along through social media. Hey, that's all I got for this episode of the Leading While Green podcast. You know it's my mission to help you live, learn, and lead with confidence. So until next time, take care and God bless.